Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to fix X-axis layer shifting on your DaVinci, XYZprinting DaVinci 1.0, 1.0A, AIO, and 2.0.
Where you go when you want some prints, but you also want props, prints and props. Yeah!
What happens with these printers is the wiring harness for the X-axis, because they didn't design it properly and design it with proper strain relief, these wires actually bend over and over and over again until they begin to break inside. And there are a few ways that you can repair this. You can go in with a multimeter and test each wire to see if there's continuity and move the wire around as you're testing for continuity, and you can find the bad wire that way and cut off the bad section and solder in a new section. And that does work, but I find that method kind of convoluted and a little complex. Takes a lot of testing and a lot of troubleshooting. The way that I'm going to show you today is a lot easier in my opinion, and it just involves taking some very, very flexible silicone wire and completely replacing the harness altogether and only keeping the ends. So what we're going to do today is we're going to solder on just the ends onto a strand of 4-pin ultra flexible silicone wire from Adafruit, and I'll have the link down below in the description for that. And okay, let's get started. Okay guys, we're just going to go ahead and go over some of the materials that you're going to need, some of the materials and tools for this job. The first thing that you're going to need is obviously the flexible wire from Adafruit. As said before, this is 4-pin flexible wire. It's silicone. I think it was under like $20 shipped to my door, so not a bad deal for getting this printer fixed permanently. The next thing you're going to need is obviously a pair of wire cutters to snip the connector ends off of the existing wire on your printer. You're going to need a few pieces of heat shrink to seal the wires after you're done soldering them. You're going to need some assorted small screwdrivers. Sometimes these are called jeweler screwdrivers. Flathead and Phillips head will do you just fine. And you're going to need a spatula like you use for taking off your 3D prints. This is going to help you open up the case of the 3D printer. You're going to need some solder flux, which is going to help you get solder on the wires and make a really good connection. You're going to, of course, need solder. This is lead-free solder, but some solder does have lead in it still. So it's very important that you work in a well-ventilated area because you really don't want to breathe that stuff in. And you're going to need a soldering iron. And if you've never soldered before, please, please, please don't use this video as an instructional. Go on YouTube, look up how to solder, because this thing gets really, really hot and can put off poisonous fumes. So you really need to know what you're doing. I've been soldering for a long time, so it's not a problem for me, and I'm working in a well-ventilated shop. So that's it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so here we go. So we've got our printer here. You can see I've already done a few upgrades to it. I've got the SD card reader right here on the side that connects to the SD card micro SD slot on the motherboard, which allows you to print off the SD card a lot easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up the printer, and it is kind of heavy. We're going to turn it around, and what we want to do is we're going to take off the left side cover. And that's this cover right here, and how we're going to do that. So we take our little spatula here that we use for removing our 3D prints, and you're just going to kind of, oh, hang on, let me get the camera good here. What you're going to do is you're just going to kind of slide it in the top here. You can see that the little corner of my spatula is in there. You're just going to pry, and as you pry, you'll begin to unclip the side panel. And there you go. Okay, now that we've got the side panel off, we can begin taking a look deeper into the printer and see what we got going on. Okay, so we've got the side of the printer off, and as you can see, this here is our X-axis, and this moves forward and backward. The Y-axis is actually what moves forward and backward, and the X-axis moves left and right, and is what has the extruder motor on it. So as you can see, there is a 4-pin connector hooked right here into the X-axis, and that is the connection for the X-axis motor. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to unplug that. We got 4 wires there. Looks like blue, orange, red, and yellow. And there's a zip tie holding these wires on. So you're just going to clip that off, and you won't actually even need to put that back on because it's really not doing the machine any favors by having it on there. So you're going to take that 4-pin cable now, and you're going to push it through about like that until it's free and it's out of there. And you can see there's a 3-pin wire that's still connected to the harness, and what that is for the X-axis end stop. Okay, and the next thing that we need to do is we need to free the cable from this cable binding, this clear cable binding that goes all the way down to the motherboard and through the back of the machine, and I'll get a better shot of that here in a second. But you'll see that there's some zip ties all along here that are holding the wire harness in place, and that's actually because this moves back and forth. You can see this curve here, and over time that curve, continuously doing that over and over and over again as you print, wears out those wires because this zip tie design is not a good design. These wires are not flexible enough, so we need to get in there and clip off all those zip ties and take off this wrap here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. You can see more of the zip ties here that run along the harness, and we're going to go ahead and get those off. Okay guys, as you can see, I unclipped the zip ties with my trusty pliers here, and it came right off of where it was being held on with those zip ties. And as you can see, the cord for the X-axis stepper motor is dangling here, and we've got this wrap around the wire. And basically all you got to do to get the wrap off around the wire, and you just kind of spin it, and as you spin it, it'll just unravel off of there. And installing it's basically going to be the reverse of that. Okay guys, and this is the back of the machine, and as you can see there are 2 screw holes here, and those are Torx screws. I believe they are T10. I could be wrong about that though. You might check some of the other YouTube disassembly guides on this thing. Unfortunately, I have taken my screws out and I haven't put them back in because they don't do any good. And it's nice to be able to just pull the back panel off whenever I want to work on something or check something out. So once you get those 2 screws off, guys, and after you've done all the zip ties and all the cable binding and all that stuff off all the way down to where it goes to the motherboard, you will just pull this right off, and then you'll see all your motherboard and all of your janky upgrades here and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so again, here we've got the motherboard, and what we're going to do is you're going to look at this bottom row here because that is where the stepper motors go. And if you look all the way down on the very bottom, you really got to look. But if you look down here, all these connectors are labeled. This one here says motor X. This one says home X, so that's going to be for the limit switch on the X-axis. This one says motor Y and home Y. So again, the same for those. And you've also got your other motors up here, like your extruder motor and your Z-axis motor. Those go up here, and you know, some other various connections, your thermistors and your power, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so basically all we're going to do is we're going to unplug this connector right here because this is the connector for the Z-axis, and you're going to see that it is still bound in a big cable bundle with a bunch of other wires that are held on by a lot of zip ties. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to snip off those zip ties just like that, and you're going to continue to pull the cable until it comes free. We got some more zip ties here. Snip those off. Let's see here. Got a big zip tie right here with a big giant cable bundle. That's all tangled up. Snip that off. Untangle it. We got what looks like one more zip tie. Okay, and if we see right here, we can see that the cable is finally completely torn apart from the cable bundle. And if you look here, you can see that we can just pull this all the way because it's completely taken off of the motherboard. So after you've got your cable all disconnected, you can just pull the end on the motherboard, the black end. You can just pull that all the way through and just kind of guide the cable as you go, and you'll just pull the entire cable right out the back of the machine. So now that we've got the cable, what we're going to do is we need to make sure that we have enough length on this cable, on our new cable, that it's going to go the entire distance. So we just need to grab our new cable. And the reason that we do that is because we need to make sure that we leave enough slack for to account for the movement of the X gantry. So we're just going to grab one end of our cable here. We've got our new cable here. We're just going to hold it on one end and string it along. Cool. Looks like where we end up is only about an inch from that plug. So if we just cut about 2 inches off away from the plug on each side, we should be able to solder these together and have about the original same length and maybe a little extra, which is always nice. Okay, so here we go. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your original connector. This is the motherboard side, and you want to come down about 2 inches. So you want about that much right there of wire sticking out. So you're just going to take your wire cutters, snip that off. You're going to end up with something like that. And you're going to set that aside, and then you do the other side. And this is the side that the motor was on. So we're going to do about the same thing there, about 2 inches off. I'm going to snip that closed. And then you can just go ahead and discard this wire that came off the printer. You can use it for something else later, or you can, you know, tie up your shoes with it, whatever you want to do, I don't care. So now what we need to do is we need to lay this out perfectly flat, because the only problem with these wires is that they're not color coded like the original wires are. That shouldn't be that big of a problem because we can just flatten it out and make sure that we get the correct wires in the correct places. So, but how we begin doing that is you want to take your wire cutters. Well, let's use a knife. We're going to use an X-Acto knife. So take your X-Acto knife and you just want to press it in between each wire and make a little slit. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow the wire to kind of break away from the other wires. And we need that so that we can get them all individually soldered. Okay guys, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to just grab the end of your wire like this, and you're just going to want to put your wire cutters on it about 3/4 of an inch down. Actually, let's do less. Let's do about 1/2 inch down. Just give it slight, ever so slight pressure. You're going to grab the other side of the wire and you're just going to pull just like that. And then you've got your wires all ready to go. So then what you need to do is you need to take each individual conductor, you need to separate it out. You can use your X-Acto knife to kind of help, because you don't want any of these wires touching. And you just want to twist it. Okay, so when you're all done, this is kind of what you want your wires to look like. They're all twisted individually, and none of them, you can look really closely and make sure you have no strands sticking out that are going to cause a problem, because if any of those conductors are touching any of the other ones, you will have issues. So you really want to make sure that everything is tight and not touching any of the other wires before you solder them together permanently. So we're just going to go ahead and do this exact same thing to the other side now. All right, and there we go. And now, guys, what we're going to want to do is we're going to get out our soldering iron, and we're going to do a process called tinning, which is where we just get a little bit of solder on the end of each of these wires so that they can be ready to be soldered to. And what you're going to want to do after you have that all done and your wires individually look like this, you're going to start doing basically the exact same thing to your harness wires. And what you're going to use for that is a tool just like this. This is a wire stripper. You can find these super cheap at Walmart or Harbor Freight or Lowe's, Home Depot, wherever. And you just select the right wire gauge. This is a pretty small gauge, so looks like the 20 to 22, which is the very smallest that this stripper will do. And that's just going to strip off the wires nice and easy. And then as soon as you got those wires all nice and stripped, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to twist them as well. And that's a very common practice that you want to get into when doing any kind of soldering work, because it just keeps your wires a lot neater when you're working with them and keeps them from getting all frayed. And if you start to have frayed wires, then you can have them shorting out against other wires and things like that that you may not be able to see right off the bat and can cause a lot of troubleshooting problems. So once they look all nice and neat like that, then you're done with that part. So we're just going to do the exact same thing to the other side, to the motor side, and here we go. All right, and again, you just want your wires nice and twisted together so that there are no frays anywhere. It should look about just like that. All right, so now we need to get ready for soldering, and I've got my trusty soldering iron right here. and my little soldering station there. So what we're going to do is first we need to tin the wires, which tinning is basically just taking flux, just like this. This is kind of an old school flux, but it's lasted me forever. So you can find it at hardware stores or Radio Shack or whatever. Any kind of flux for lead-free solder should do okay. But anyway, what flux does is it cleans off any of the impurities in the wires and in the metal so that the solder will adhere to it really well, and it really helps you get a good solid connection. So what we're going to do is you just want to kind of barely dip each of these little connectors into the flux. I have a little bit pulled up on the edge here for just that purpose. So now that we have those all fluxed, we're going to take some of our solder. I've got my solder here and my soldering iron. I'm going to melt just a little bit. I'm just going to get kind of a little ball there, and then you just touch it to the wires. You'll hear it kind of sizzle and pop. And there you go. And now these are tinned. You can see they're nice and shiny. Now these are tinned and they will accept solder much better than a regular wire. So we're just going to go ahead and do all of these wires. Okay, so now that we've got that all done, we've got all of our wires all fluxed together and everything, we need to go ahead and slide on a piece of heat shrink to this side and then go ahead and solder these wires together. Okay, so I've gone ahead and cut up my heat shrink into smaller pieces. These are probably about 1-inch pieces, and that's going to work perfectly for getting these soldered together. So here we go. All you got to do is you just take your harness side and slide the heat shrink over it. You can go ahead and do all the wires right now because we're going to do them each individually. So you just slide it on just like that. Okay, and then once you've got it like that, there we go. Once you got it like that, you're ready to begin soldering together. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to keep the wires all in the same orientation as they are already. So we're going to basically number these wires in our head 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to solder the colors 1, 2, 3, 4, so that when we go to solder the other side, we know that they're matched up correctly, because again, these silicone wires do not come color coded, unfortunately. You could, I guess, take like a Sharpie or some paint or something like that and color each wire so that you know which one is which, but for this I'm just going to keep track of it in my head as we're going, and that should work just fine. So here we go. So I've got one of these little helping hands things, and these are absolutely fantastic if you plan on doing much soldering at all, because you can just kind of clip what you're doing in your workplace. You can just kind of clip it there, and makes it extremely easy. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and solder the yellow wire first. You're just going to butt the two up next to each other with some solder on the soldering iron, and butt them up next to each other, heat up the solder, and that's all. All right, and now that those are all done, actually we're going to go ahead and do the other side before we seal these heat shrink tubes up, because we want to make sure that we get the right orientation. So we know that yellow starts here on number 1, so we're just going to go all the way down. We know that this one is number 1, and in fact, I'm going to go ahead and mark it with a marker so that we know that this one with the black on it is wire number 1, which we know wire number 1 is for yellow. So these should be in the same orientation: yellow, red, blue, orange. Yep, sure enough, yellow, red, blue, orange. So we know that is the same orientation, so we should just be able to connect the yellow wire to wire number 1, and that should lead us to the exact same configuration as the other side. So here we go. Oh, gotta put our heat shrink on first. Can't forget that. You will be very, very sorry if you forget the heat shrink. Okay, there we go. So you're going to need a heat gun like this. This is the cheapest one that Harbor Freight sells. They do break down constantly, so if you buy this specific model, I do recommend that you get to the extended service warranty on it, because these things are kind of junk. They do work, but it will break at some point. So get the extended warranty. It's only like $5, and keep your receipt. Okay, here we go. So all we're going to do is we just need to slide the heat shrink down over the wire connection of each wire all the way down, and you really want to make sure you're slid all the way down, because again, the silicone wire, you really don't want any of those touching each other. So you're going to put it on its high setting or its low setting, and you're just going to hit it with the heat gun. And as you heat it up, that heat shrink is going to begin to shrink around those wires and make a nice tight seal. And that's how you want it to look, right there, when you're all done. And just for some added security, I'm actually going to go ahead and take some Gorilla Tape and do just a little bit of tape just to hold this in that orientation. Okay guys, and now we're going to just go ahead and take our new wire and we're just going to slide it through where the old wire was and just go right through here, right like the old wire was, and we'll get all hooked up and try to print. Alright guys, you can see down in here that I've got my cable all wrapped back up and I've got this cable all secured as well. I actually like to run these without the zip ties, holding them to parallel with the y-axis because I feel like it gives them more freedom to be able to move and therefore bends them less. So we're going to go ahead and put the back cover back on, get this thing plugged in, heat it up and start a print and see what happens. Okay, see you after that. All right, as you can see, everything's printing good now. No sign of skipping on the x-axis. And what are we printing? Of course, Baby Groot. All right, so as you can see, this is probably the best way that you can go ahead and fix the x-axis on your DaVinci 1.0, 1.0a, or AIO. Just for reference, here is a one that I recently finished up. Please, so if you liked this one, please hit subscribe. I'll have more 3D printing and prop making related videos coming in the future. And if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't, a thumbs down, and let me know in the comments what I can do better. So yeah, thank you guys very much, and see you next time.